Tucker Carlson began with what seemed to be a pivot on Israel. Israel is a problem. Netanyahu is a problem. At one point, I think he said Netanyahu's evil. But he's migrated from that to something quite different, which is a defense of Maduro's socialism in Venezuela. He says Maduro is actually pretty conservative. A defense of Sharia law as being one way to get law and order and a kind of safe society. Defense of Hamas to a degree. Tucker says it's not a terrorist group. It's a political organization, maybe akin to the Labor Party. You and I have both known Tucker over many years.
Yeah.
What is your diagnosis of what is going on here? Because I think it's taken many people by surprise. I know with rank and file Republicans who are used to Tucker from his days at Fox News, they just say things like, we're confused, because I think it's hard for them to believe that Tucker has somehow metamorphosed into something new. What do you think's going on?
It's hard to know. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that both of us have known him for many years. I go back to 1991 when he first worked for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette newspaper in Little Rock. That was before he went on to CNN, MSNBC, and all the television iterations that led to Fox News. I worked with him every week in New York for 6.5 years when I was a Fox News host. I never knew Tucker this way. He's a very smart guy. He could be a little arrogant, but intellectually honest, and asked hard questions and was thoughtful. What I see now is somebody I don't recognize. I don't know what happened to him.
I mean, what to me is odd about it, there are people who change their mind, right? I mean, Whittaker Chambers used to be a communist, and then he became a capitalist.
Yeah.
But of course, he wrote a 600-page book called Witness, in which he gives a full account of how he went from here to there. There are atheists who become Christians. There are Christians who lose their faith. And so what I'm getting at is people are quite entitled to make a U-turn, but usually it comes with some explanation for how you got from here to there. What made you change your mind? As far as I know, we have gotten no such thing from not just Tucker, but Candace as well.
Yeah.
And so are we just at this point, would you say that we should just give up the quest to figure out their motives and merely look at the effects of what they're doing? And are the effects of what they're doing bad for Trump, bad for MAGA? How would you read the consequences of this whole turn?
You made one of the most astute statements just then that I have heard in this whole milieu of talking about Tucker Carlson. I want to commend you for it, because you said that if a person makes a significant philosophical, ideological change, radical, I mean, the Apostle Paul did, but then he spent the rest of his life writing about it. Whittaker Chambers, another great example. C.S. Lewis, phenomenal Christian mind, but came from a point of atheism. For Tucker to have made this dramatic, and I mean 180-degree shift of opinion, I think he owes some explanation. It's not the what that is so troubling, it's the why. We know the what, but what we don't know is the why.
There's a debate, as you know, about AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, and some of it focuses on the fact that AIPAC is a foreign entity, and I've heard it said, no, this is American Jews contributing to AIPAC. But I think what isn't in doubt is that AIPAC does have a pretty sort of active surveillance of America, and particularly of American representatives. I've heard that AIPAC assigns like one guy to each congressman, So in other words, it's like each congressman's got his AIPAC guy. and this, of course, has led to the idea that somehow AIPAC is pulling the puppet strings on the U.S. Congress. What do you think about it? I mean, if it's true, it's bad, right?
Sure. It would be horrible.
But are you saying it's not true?
I wouldn't say it's true. I would again say it's kind of like saying Israel is genocidal. To say that AIPAC runs Congress, they're not really good at it, because if they were really good at it, you'd have votes that would be closer to 500 to 35 than what you have, which is a bare majority in the House and sometimes not even enough in the Senate to carry a pro-Israel bill. So there's some bipartisanship when it comes to support for Israel. But some of the harshest voices in our entire Congress are voices against Israel and against any partnership with Israel. I would also say that if we're going to criticize AIPAC, it's fair. We can do that. It is an American organization. It's not a foreign organization. It's registered. It complies with the laws of disclosure. But what about CARE? CARE is the Council for American Islamic Relations. And they're pretty pointed in what they're hoping for and pushing for. And then you do have the foreign money, billions of dollars that has come from Qatar and from other Middle Eastern nations for the sole purpose of influencing American public policy. What we know is frightening enough, but what we don't know, how much of that money is poured into algorithms and bots so that social media can be completely poisoned with sometimes not just anti-Israel postings, but anti-American postings as well.
I was looking at an article that talked about the contributions of Qatar just to Georgetown, a single university, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. So, in other words, it's ironic because if you're pro-Israel on social media, you keep getting people who say, well, did you collect your $7,000? And I think what you're saying is that here is an Islamic regime that is buying, political science departments and buying huge media organizations and perhaps, leveraging these algorithms. So it's perhaps the case that the Qatari money, is much bigger than the Israeli money by a factor of, I don't know how much.
Sometimes I would suggest to the Israelis they would do well to spend more money trying to get their version of the story out. They're great at fighting a kinetic war. They're not as good at fighting an information war. If they were better at it, they wouldn't be getting hammered every day and having most of the media completely against them. It's a very one-sided. People talk about, particularly in Israel, that they fight a 7-front war. I always say, no, they fight an 8-front war. It's not just these direct enemies who shoot rockets, missiles, and UAVs at them. It's also the 8th front, which is the media, which is almost, not altogether, but almost universally anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, and anti-Jew.
What would you say to those who say, all right, Israel perhaps does us a lot of good, but why do we give so much money to Israel? $3.8 billion on a general basis. That amount was amped up in the response to October 7th. Why doesn't the United States, which has a lot of financial problems and a mountain of debt to deal with, just give not a single dollar to any other country, let them manage on their own?
That's a fair policy thought and question. And by the way, it's interesting in that the person who is now leading the effort to end even the $3.8 billion is the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who says, we don't really need this money. To Americans, I would say, it's not a huge amount in the great scheme of things. Ask yourself, do we get anything for that? Here's the answer. Actually, we do. Every bit of that is turned around and spent on American hardware that is used by the Israeli military, whether it's tanks, F-15s. What people don't understand is the technology that we share, the intelligence we share, the military hardware that we share would cost us multiples of the $3.8 billion if we had to purchase it from Israel. But because of the partnership, we get it as a result of having decided that we are going to work with them. Let me give you a quick example of how just in one platform, we get more back than we give. The F-35 is the most sophisticated fighter jet in the history of mankind. There's never been anything quite like it. It's pretty much a flying computer. It's the first aircraft in history where the pilot is the least common denominator of success. It is the technology that's built into the plane. Israel buys the F-35. They don't just take it off the showroom floor and say, just like we want it. They refigure, they reconstitute that F-35 for their unique needs. And then they do something that we don't really have the ability to do. They use that plane in combat. Now, because of AI, every time that plane takes off and does a mission and lands, it's collecting data. And that data is being stored. It is now making that airplane a smarter airplane when it lands than when it took off. If we had to have a war just to get the information that the F-35 is collecting because they're out fighting a real war, we couldn't afford it. It would take tens of billions of dollars for the research, development, and for the application of it. I never hear Americans say, thank you, Israel. You guys are at war, so we don't have to be. You're the tip of the spear. But thanks for sharing all the things that airplane collected while it was flying over in harm's way, getting shot at by Iranian missiles. Maybe we should say, okay, we're not going to give you any money. I'll tell you, there's other things. Every round of ammunition that the IDF shoots is manufactured just outside of Little Rock, Arkansas at a Sig Sauer plant. There are hundreds of people with good paying jobs because Israel buys that ammo. There are hundreds of people in Camden, Arkansas. This is just in my home state, where they manufacture parts of the Iron Dome, David Sling, and the Arrow missile defense system. Other people working in Arizona, Michigan, Missouri, other states. Because of the defense partnerships that we have with Israel, there are thousands of American jobs, good paying jobs, because of this relationship. We could end that if we wanted to, but a lot of Americans would be quite unhappy if they lost those jobs.
If you have a 401k or an IRA, please listen. Gold is at record highs. What many people don't know is this: you can move part of your retirement money legally and without tax penalties into physical gold you actually own. Alpha Omega Gold helps you do this through a gold IRA. Your gold is real. It is stored safely. It is in your name. Learn more at ao.gold/stand. Alpha Omega Gold is our sponsor, and they proudly stand with Israel.